The lunch rush had long passed, leaving the restaurant with an echo of clinking forks and murmurs from the last lingering patrons. The place had seen better days. Once a buzzing spot with a loyal lunch crowd, now it was lucky to fill half its tables. The decor was outdated. Peeling wallpaper, scratched wood tables, a flickering light above the bar. The staff moved on autopilot, waiting for their shifts to end, more tired than hopeful. At 2:17 p.m., the front door creaked open again. A man stepped in. He didn't match the neighborhood's usual crowd. Tailored jacket, polished shoes, clean, shaven, with an intensity in his gaze, not flashy, but there was a precision to him, like he noticed more than he let on. He didn't wait to be seated. He scanned the room, chose the booth in the far corner facing the kitchen, and slid in without a word. Marcy, the waitress on her double shift, noticed. She'd worked here for 6 years, long enough to tell when someone wasn't just here for food. She approached with the usual pad and fake cheer, but he cut through it with a glance. "Steak," he said, "medium rare, whatever sides the chef recommends." That was odd. People around here didn't ask for the chef's choice. Most didn't trust the place enough to stray from fries or mashed potatoes. Still, Marcy nodded, jotted the order, and headed back. When she gave the ticket to the kitchen, Lou, the cook, raised a brow. "Who the hell orders steak at 2 p.m.?" he muttered, reaching for the meat from the back of the fridge. Marcy didn't answer. She peeked through the pass window at the man in the booth. He wasn't looking at his phone, wasn't watching the TV above the bar. He was studying the kitchen door, watching who came in, who went out. His eyes flicked upward each time Lou stepped out for a smoke or the dishwasher dropped off a bin. He was listening more than eating. She could tell. When she brought the steak, she set it down gently. The man gave her a tight nod. No smile, no thanks. He cut into the meat, took one bite, then set the knife down and chewed slowly, eyes still on the door. Marcy felt her stomach tighten. Something about him made her nervous, but it wasn't fear, not quite. It was the way he didn't belong here, yet didn't seem lost, like he had come looking for something. By the time he was halfway through his plate, she knew. It wasn't his first time here. Maybe not in that suit or under that name, but something about the way he looked at the tile on the floor, the cracked window behind the booth. He remembered this place. Or what it used to be. She dropped the check without a word. He looked at it, then at her, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. She hesitated, reached into her apron, slid a small slip of paper beneath the receipt, then walked away without meeting his gaze. He didn't unfold it right away, finished the last bite of steak, took a sip of water, then he picked up the bill and opened the folded note. For a second, nothing changed. His expression didn't flicker, but Marcy saw it, in the tightening of his jaw, the way his hand stilled over the paper. He folded it back neatly, slid a bill under the check, and stood. No words, no thanks, no questions. He walked past the kitchen door without glancing at it, past the bar, past Marcy, who was now pretending to wipe down a table near the window. Only when he reached the door did he stop. Briefly, like something pulled at him. Marcy had seen all types in this place. Gruff contractors, tired moms with toddlers, old-timers who ordered the same thing every Thursday at noon, people who came in either out of routine or necessity. No one ever walked in like they were inspecting the place, but the man in the booth wasn't like the others. He didn't glance at the menu, didn't ask for specials. He didn't fidget or check his phone while he waited. He sat still, eyes tracking movement around the restaurant like he was cataloging something. That was the first thing she noticed. How quiet he was, how intentional. He scanned everything, the cracked mirror behind the counter, the exits, even the water stain creeping across the ceiling tile. When she brought his glass of water, she caught him watching the hallway to the storage room, where the kitchen staff occasionally disappeared. Not in a curious way. He wasn't lost or trying to figure out the layout. It was more like he already knew it, and he was waiting to see if it had changed. He didn't smile when she set the drink down, just nodded once. His eyes met hers briefly, sharp and steady, then dropped back to the table like he didn't want her reading anything off his face. But Marcy had been doing this too long. Some customers wore their stories out loud. This one tried to bury his under that calm, but the edges were fraying. She tried to shake it off. There were still tables to check, ketchup bottles to refill. She brought his steak when it was ready. Lou had muttered something again about the meat not being fresh cut, but Marcy didn't repeat it. When she placed the plate down, the man thanked her quietly, barely above a whisper. She turned to leave, then noticed him glance at the utensils, not casually, but like he was testing them for weight, like he was thinking about more than eating. As she moved behind the counter, she watched from a distance. He didn't dig in right away. He studied the food for a few seconds, then cut into the steak slowly, watching the juices pool on the plate. He tasted it, chewed once, then let the fork rest as he wiped his mouth with a napkin. No one ate steak like that here, not like it mattered. This wasn't exactly a 5-star place. It was a place people ended up, not sought out, which made her wonder even more. Why was he here? She asked Becca at the register if she recognized him. New guy, Marcy whispered. Becca shook her head. Never seen him. Doesn't seem like he's from around here. He's watching everything. Marcy said under her breath, not just people, the building, the staff. Becca raised an eyebrow. Creep? Marcy hesitated. No, something else. Back on the floor, she lingered by the window booths, pretending to clear away crumbs. Every time someone entered the kitchen or came out of the supply closet, the man looked up, briefly, subtly, but he looked. Like he was tracking more than orders, like he was waiting for someone who hadn't shown up yet. Marcy felt a chill crawl up her spine. She had grown used to odd customers. They came with the job, but this was different. This guy wasn't unpredictable. He was too controlled for that. He was calculating something, and it had everything to do with this place. When Lou stepped out for a cigarette break, the man's eyes lingered on the swinging door behind the grill. When the dishwasher ran a bus tub past his booth, he barely flinched, but his eyes followed him to the back. Marcy noticed how he seemed to take mental snapshots of each interaction. Even the way she walked, she saw him tracking her path through the dining room. She went to refill his water, and he gave her that same tight nod. But this time, she stayed a second longer. "Everything okay with your meal?" she asked. "Fine," he said. "Better than I expected." His voice was calm, but there was a trace of something else underneath. A hesitation maybe, or regret. It was hard to pin down. She started to walk away, then turned back toward the kitchen, pretending to adjust her apron. Her eyes landed on the small metal panel just above the prep sinks, scratched but still there. The panel Lou told her never to touch. The one he joked about covering up for a reason. She remembered the night 2 years ago when the health inspector showed up and left before even doing the full walk through. That had always stuck with her. Marcy looked back at the man. He was chewing slowly again, eyes on the panel, not just curious. The note wasn't planned. Marcy didn't even realize she was going to write it until her hand was already reaching for the pad she used for custom orders. Something in her chest had tightened after watching him chew that last bite of steak, not because he looked sick or upset, but because he didn't. He looked like someone who had just confirmed something he didn't want to believe. He was still sitting in that far booth, mostly done with his food, but not rushing. People who came here didn't linger unless they were waiting on someone or hiding from something. But he had no phone out, no drink refill, nothing to do but sit. It was as if he was listening for something behind the walls. Marcy had been watching him long enough to catch the difference in his posture. When she brought the steak earlier, he'd been stiff, alert. Now he looked heavy, like whatever he came to find had finally sunk in. Maybe it was the meat, maybe it was the people still working here, maybe it was the kitchen he kept staring at. She glanced at the time, 3:08 p.m. The place was nearly empty. Just a quiet couple near the window, arguing in whispers, and an old man at the bar, half asleep over a cup of coffee. Lou was still in the back, probably asleep too. or smoking behind the dumpster again. She picked up the check slip, pretending to total it, but instead, she tore a fresh piece from her order pad and leaned over the side counter near the register where no one could see her write. The pen trembled slightly as she put it to paper. She didn't know what to say, not exactly. She couldn't write too much. It had to be fast, careful, but clear. She thought of last summer, when her cousin had gotten sick after a rare steak here, and the doctor quietly asked if he'd eaten something uninspected. Of the girl who used to bus tables who disappeared from the schedule overnight. Of the old door in the back that nobody used but Lou always kept locked with a new padlock. There were too many things Marcy had stopped asking about. Too many reasons she'd told herself to mind her own business and get through her shift. But this man, he didn't feel like someone passing through. He looked like someone who knew, or used to know, something real about this place. And if he didn't, he was close to finding out. She kept the message short, 5 words, no names, no details, just enough to hit hard. She folded the note in half, tucked it behind the printed receipt, then slid it into the check sleeve. Her hands were steady again, the fear was gone. She felt something else resolve, maybe. When she approached his table, he didn't look up right away. His fork was resting across the plate, napkin folded beside it. She placed the checkbook beside the plate, careful to keep her face neutral. Just another server delivering a bill. He nodded once, but didn't reach for it yet. Marcy stepped back, turned away slowly. She forced herself not to look back, not to show anything. She returned to the register, picked up a rag and started wiping down the countertop, the same motion she always did after dropping off a check. Familiar, natural, but her heart was racing now. She risked a glance up as he opened the checkbook. His eyes flicked to the receipt first, then paused. He didn't touch the note, just looked at it for a moment, then finally picked it up and unfolded it. Marcy watched the change happen in real time. He froze for barely a second. No gasp, no flinch, but something in his expression shifted. His brows didn't move, his mouth didn't open, but his eyes, they were different now. Focused, as if the note didn't surprise him, only confirmed something. He folded it carefully, like it mattered. Then, without a word, he reached into his coat, pulled out cash, and slipped it inside the sleeve. He stood, smoothed out his jacket, and looked toward the kitchen one last time. Marcy kept wiping the same spot on the counter. Her hand moved in circles, slow and methodical. He started walking toward the door. She watched him pass by the bar, the window, the coat rack no one used anymore. No one else in the room noticed, no one ever did, but Marcy's eyes were locked on him. He paused for just a moment before he stepped outside. The paper was thin, like any other order slip, but the weight of the words it carried changed everything. Folded neatly inside the check sleeve, it waited for him to find it, its edges barely visible behind the printed receipt. Marcy had tucked it in deliberately, as if slipping a match into dry grass. When the man opened the checkbook, he didn't react right away. His eyes scanned the total, saw the folded paper, and paused. He didn't reach for it immediately. Instead, he sat back in the booth, the edge of his hand brushing against the note like he was giving himself one more second of pretending it wasn't there. Then he took it slowly, unfolded it, and read. There were only 5 words. Don't trust the back room. The handwriting was careful, in blue ink, rounded letters, slanted slightly to the right. It didn't look like a message written in panic. It looked practiced. Like it had been written before, the phrase was simple. No context, no explanation, just a direction not to believe what waited past that scuffed gray door with the missing handle. But the moment he read it, the entire mood shifted. Not in the room itself, nothing around him changed, but inside him, something locked into place. He had been watching that door for a reason. He hadn't known exactly what he was looking for, but now he had confirmation. That was the thing about instincts. They needed so little to validate them. 1 line of ink was enough. The back room, that door just past the kitchen with the heavy padlock, and the handwritten employees only sign that was barely clinging to the splintered frame. He had noticed it within minutes of sitting down, the way people passed it without ever touching it, the way Lou, the cook, looked toward it every time someone mentioned storage or supplies. It wasn't just a room. It was a secret. He had heard stories before, places like this, hidden in plain sight, clinging to survival with no real foot traffic, no advertising, yet still open, still paying staff, still ordering bulk meat without clear invoices. Restaurants that seemed to operate outside the usual rules, they always had a room like that, and someone always tried to pretend it didn't exist. But this message, it didn't feel like a rumor, it felt like a warning. From someone who knew. He folded the note again, smaller this time, until it was no bigger than a matchbox, slipped it into his coat pocket. He sat there another moment, staring at the door behind the kitchen. He traced the sounds, the soft hum of the walk-in fridge, the occasional clang of a metal tray, the distant muffled voice of Lou muttering into a phone. It all sounded normal, but now it felt staged. The waitress, Marcy, her name tag read, was still behind the counter, wiping down an already clean section. Her hands moved automatically, but her eyes were no longer focused on the rag. She was watching him, waiting. She had written that note knowing he would read it. That meant she had taken a risk, maybe a big one. He wondered how long she had worked here, what she had seen, what made her decide that today, of all days, was the moment to speak up. He also wondered what was in that back room that scared her enough to warn a stranger. The words replayed in his head. Don't trust the back room, not don't go in, and not stay away. It was more subtle than that, more dangerous. It implied something deeper, that what was back there might look normal, that it might be explained away, that people might try to tell him it was nothing, but he couldn't trust it. He glanced once more at the kitchen door. The voices had gone quiet, no trays, no footsteps, just silence. He knew then that someone in that kitchen had seen the note pass hands, or they sensed something had shifted. He slid out of the booth quietly, not drawing attention, kept his movements calm, natural, walked past the register, past Marcy, who didn't speak, didn't move. Her eyes followed him, but her face stayed neutral, not out of fear, out of practice. He reached the front door, resting his hand on the old brass handle. Behind him something creaked, a sound from the back hallway, quick and sharp, not loud enough for anyone else to react, but he heard it, just like he was meant to. The creak from the back was faint, but his ears caught it instantly. It wasn't a kitchen sound, too sharp, too deliberate. A hinge, maybe, a floorboard under a boot, the kind of sound people make when they think no one's paying attention. He didn't flinch. Just stood there, one hand still on the brass handle of the front door, the other tucked loosely into his coat pocket, fingers brushing the edge of the folded note. He had entered the place like someone with a purpose, quiet, efficient, composed. But now, standing in front of the exit, something had drained out of him. His face, still unreadable to most, had lost its polish. His eyes, once calm and focused, carried the weight of recognition, like something old and buried had been unearthed and confirmed. Marcy could see it. She hadn't moved from behind the counter, hadn't said a word since she dropped the bill, but her breath caught as she watched his shoulder rise slightly, just for a second, before he pushed the door open with the softest motion. The bell above the door didn't jingle. It hadn't worked in years. The silence was almost worse. He didn't turn back, didn't glance toward the kitchen again. That would have signaled too much. He just walked out, like he'd finished his meal and had somewhere better to be. But everything in his body language had shifted. The confident stride from earlier was gone, replaced with something colder, heavier. He moved with the kind of care a person uses when they know they're being watched. The old man at the bar didn't stir. The couple by the window were still arguing in low tones, oblivious, but Marcy stood frozen, her hand gripping the counter now. She wanted to watch him disappear completely from view, but she also didn't want to be seen doing it. So she kept her head angled down and used the mirror behind the liquor shelf to catch one last glimpse of him stepping out into the dull gray light of the afternoon. He didn't look back. Outside, the air had shifted. It was cooler than it had been just an hour ago, a breeze picking up enough to rattle the loose sign hanging from the awning. He walked across the cracked sidewalk slowly, as if each step demanded its own thought. There was no car waiting for him, no one parked nearby. He didn't check his watch or pull out his phone. He just kept walking. Marcy exhaled finally, quietly, then turned, slow and measured, and reached for the same rag she'd been using. The same rhythm resumed, but her mind was still locked on what had just happened. She didn't know where he was going. She didn't know what he would do with what she'd written. But the way he'd folded that note, the way his whole presence had changed without a word, told her enough. He understood. She glanced toward the kitchen. Still no sound, still no movement. Something about that silence stretched longer than it should have. Behind that door, the one marked employees only, was a space she'd only seen twice. Once, when she first started, when Lou had asked her to help him carry in boxes late after closing, and once again by accident when someone left it open. She remembered the smell, metallic and earthy, not quite raw meat, not quite chemicals. And she remembered the crates with no labels, the way Lou's eyes had narrowed when he saw her glance too long. He never said a word about it, but she hadn't been asked to help again. She'd never spoken of it. Not until today. The man had come in like a stranger, but Marcy knew he had once been connected to this place, whether as a customer, a worker, or something more hidden. There was a way he looked at the kitchen, like a man who had already walked through it once, and had come back to see if the shadows had changed shape. They hadn't. The door swung shut behind him, quiet as a breath. No one inside said a word, no questions asked, no calls after him. The quiet resumed like nothing had ever happened.